Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Jenny Bates, and I'm the Director General, Economics, Climate and Global Issues in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK. Before we start today, can I recommend that you put your headphones on so that you can hear today's discussion. We have a very lively and vibrant COP community around us, and it will enable you to hear the conversation. The conversation will be in English, and the headphone is 0 for English, 1 for French, and 2 for Portuguese. So hopefully that means that you can hear what we have to say. And I'd very much like to welcome you all here today to this event that is a discussion and a celebration of UK-Africa partnership on climate and nature. We have a really fantastic panel of colleagues to talk about this issue. And maybe just a couple of opening remarks from me. When we think about climate change, clearly African countries are among those least responsible for climate change, but most vulnerable to its impacts. Natural disasters alone have affected 400 million Africans this century, and yet Africa receives just over 3% of global climate finance flows, while servicing debt, which alone accounts for around 10% of Africa's GDP. Africa is also, though, a continent of massive potential in the solution to the climate and nature crisis. It's home to 60% of the best solar resources globally, has the world's largest territorial carbon sink in the Congo Basin forest. And the UK and Africa have a long track record of working in partnership. With BII, and you'll hear more from Diana this morning, we are investing in solar power from Sierra Leone to Kenya to Egypt. The UK is committed to reform of the multilateral financial system to ensure more climate and nature finance flows to where it's most needed, including our support for the Bridgetown initiative. And the UK wants to strengthen our partnership with Africa. We're committing to an approach that works productively with partners across the continent and allows the UK and Africa to grow together. Just last week, our Foreign Secretary launched a consultation on a new approach to Africa when he was in Nigeria. Today is a really great opportunity to focus on how we can strengthen that partnership. And I'm really keen to hear from the panel and to have a really constructive discussion on this topic. So with that, I'm going to move across and begin the discussion. We have a great panel, as I say, and what I'm going to do is ask each of them to offer some reflections on a sort of opening question around how you are helping to increase investment ambition in climate and nature in Africa, and what you need others to do, including the UK, to grow that approach. And I'm going to start, first of all, with Canon Honourable Dr. Ruth Nakibawara Sentawu from the Uganda, the Minister of Energy, Mineral and Development. Minister, let me ask you to speak first.
Thank you so much, and good morning, colleagues. I'm so pleased to be here this morning. Once again, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I bring you greetings from Uganda, the Pearl of Africa. And I want to begin by thanking the UK government for the partnership so far that we have enjoyed. And I want to thank you for the summary in your opening remarks, which has put everybody to know the potential and the challenge of Africa. I think what countries have to do to begin with is to make sure that there are policies on the ground that can guide on any kind of investment. So Uganda's energy policy allows whoever wants to come and partner with us to come and do so. We have our energy policy that has established how much energy we shall need to be able to see most of our populations transit from where they are. And we introduced or commissioned the Energy Transition Plan in Dubai during COP28. And that plan is embedded in plans for increasing energy generation. First of all, Uganda's energy generation mix is comprised of renewable energy. 90% of that is hydropower. We have other sources like solar, geothermal, nuclear, basically clean energy. So we are not so much worried about transiting from that source of fuel. So our energy transition plan is to make sure that at least by 2040, we have 52,000 megawatts generated. The challenge is investing in transmission and distribution infrastructure, which requires affordable amount of money in order for us to produce affordable power. Because you can have power, you can transmit it and distribute it, but reliability and affordability is another thing. So the other thing is the greatest challenge to climate and environment is the cutting down of trees in search for charcoal and firewood for cooking. And here is where we partnered with UK when you introduced, you enabled us to introduce clean cooking facility or unit in my ministry. And we are so grateful. You also helped us to come up with a unit in Ministry of Finance, that unit which will be making sure that we partake of the climate change funds. So if we come with technologies that can save the forests, that can save people from using charcoal, which causes death. I shared when I was in Paris. In Paris, we had a clean cooking summit, and I shared that I lost a sister who followed me because she was staying with my grandma and they were cooking from the house. And the girl coughed, and we didn't know the cause. But I realized that it could have been because of, that method of cooking. So an entry point in Uganda will be specifically to make sure that we cut on the cost of charcoal burning and the cost of search for firewood. The other point is Uganda's generosity in as far as refugee hosting is concerned. I think we have the highest number of refugees and we treat them equally. So what happens when the refugees come? They invade forests because they have to construct shelters, they have to look for firewood for cooking. So in this regard, if we can be assisted in establishing communal cooking facilities that can save the forests and also save the health of the people that are in charge of making sure that their families get food. On the last note, Uganda also hosts numerous minerals that are critical, that can be utilized. And the laws that we have in place allow you to come and invest, but you have to add value. And that will facilitate on the e-mobility, where we started manufacturing electric cars, and we want to transform all the motorcycles from using petrol and diesel to using electricity. So that is a new venture we are entering into, which can be an area of partnership with you. But all in all, on behalf of my government, I would like really to appreciate the relationship between us, government of Uganda and UK, and we have enjoyed it. We have demonstrated cooking using electricity, that it's cheaper than even cooking using charcoal at the embassy, the UK embassy in Uganda, where the ambassador was involved in cooking herself, former Ambassador Kate, and myself and the rest. We demonstrated. And so if you make electricity cheaper, I think people with time will transit from using charcoal and firewood, because they will know that electricity actually is not expensive. that fear is there. People think electricity is expensive. They don't even try to cook. Thank you so much. I think I can say that for now. Maybe if there are questions, I'll be able to answer them. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Minister. And it's great to hear the concrete examples of UK-Uganda cooperation that you were referring to there. Next, we're going to hear from Helena, who is the Deputy Director General of the Global Green Growth Initiative. Helena, over to you.
Lovely. It's great to be here and with the panelists as well. And with Ruth, Uganda is one of my very dear countries. I lived for a couple of years in Uganda, and I have many dear friends there. Now, what does GGGI do? We're still pretty new, so many people still haven't heard of us. We're about 12 years old. We're an intergovernmental organisation, and that means we're run by our members who are governments, and Uganda is one of our governments. UK is another of our governments. So we have about 64 members and partners who are all governments. And we have operations in about 50 countries around the world, many of them in Africa. Whilst we do all the policy and planning and NDC and strategies, we have a big focus of climate finance mobilization at scale. And our values are so important to us. Our values are being bold, being excellent, being transformational, and being inclusive. And they honour many of the things that the COP this week is trying to achieve. We have a lot of concrete examples, and one you've already referred to. So the climate finance unit that has been set up in the Ministry of Finance in Uganda, that has been set up with the UK funding through GGGI. So we have recruited staff for the government, with the government. Some of our staff sit in the government, and already they've mobilised over $200 million behind their climate finance strategy, but for their NDC. They've got $450 million in the pipeline. And that finance unit was only set up just over a year ago. So that is an example of how, if governments have the right capacity in Africa, they can access money. And money is really, really important. Now, we have HOHIT is here if anybody's interested about our work with the Africa Union. What we're trying to do is scale that type of approach of supporting countries in their financing strategies in Africa. So already we've supported another 3 countries, including Cote d'Ivoire and Zambia, in their financing strategies through the Africa Union. That's with Canadian finance. But we have so much demand from other countries. So that's one very concrete example. Another thing is on bankable projects. So I'm absolutely passionate about private sector investment in Africa. I think Africa should be one of the richest continents in the world. You have, all of the natural resources, the human capital, one of the most, largest bread baskets in the world. So what we try and do in every instance is find solutions that work behind government priorities but crowd in private sector finance. And I was really fortunate to visit Senegal earlier this year, where we've been given money by the Qatar government on climate agriculture, climate smart agriculture, a combination of switching from diesel, which is very expensive, to renewables, which has a low ongoing cost, but also using drought-resistant seeds with the Africa Rice Centre. And that has significantly increased yields. For some farmers, it's doubled their yield. That is massive. But we didn't stop there. That benefited thousands of farmers. But then we created a facility with the Sovereign Wealth Fund, FONSIS, of government's own money of about $40 million that will scale that work. So for me, it's all about scale, and that's what GGGI does. It tries to scale everything as far as possible and look at really innovative solutions. Now, in terms of what the UK can do, and I want to say thank you to the UK, because the first thing is to lead by example. There are many countries in the world that are just not leading by example. Transitions from fossil fuel economies are very complicated, and they can be quite frightening for countries. But the UK is taking very significant steps and all the time announcing new ambitions. So I want to say the first thing is to lead by example, but I think you are in terms of switching the economy to renewables. The second thing is a bit more controversial, and that is transparency. So one of the big energy transition commitments globally has been the just energy transition. And a number of countries that have been the beneficiary countries have felt that they haven't had a transparent understanding of what was being offered by the wealthier countries. So my second request of the UK would be to be transparent in terms of what is being offered. Is it grant? Is it concessional lending? How concessional is that lending? What type of instruments are on offer? And again, here I think the UK can go even beyond what you already have in terms of the value offer. So you have a chain where you offer grant. We have BII here, which is a very important part of His Majesty's government's offer. But bringing that all together in terms of those different instruments, first loss guarantees, concessional lending, equity, and bringing that together into a whole value chain. I'm really looking at how you can get much faster accelerated investment on the ground in Africa, because a lot of the investments, and this is not, I'm not saying the UK, but in general, it's just taking too long. We don't have enough time yet. We can't wait 5 years. How can we be creative? How can we be bold and brave? So the second request would be the overall value chain. Just look at how it can all work together in a really significant way. And then the third request is to be really bold with your financing. It is still one of the largest ODA funders in the world. It is often one of the most innovative. You are certainly one of the best to work with. We love working with the UK. The staff are very able, competent, and knowledgeable, expert. But really let's work together at how we can scale the successes so that they transform the whole economy and not just focus on several thousand people. Let's focus on the millions of people that need to have their lives transformed. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Helena, and some really good concrete proposals there for us to think about in terms of next steps. Now I'm going to turn to one of my fabulous colleagues, Diana Layfield, who is the Chair of British International Investment. Diana, over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. And thank you all for listening through. I think competing with both the Brazilians and the coffee machine is always a challenge, so thank you for being here. I think the first thing I wanted to do was to underline Jenny's point about how significant this is. I think a lot of people look at Africa and say the transition challenge isn't so huge in finance. But actually, what you have in Africa is two things. You have a really interesting transition challenge, but much more excitingly, you have an opportunity across much of the continent to do this right the first time. So to really build climate-friendly renewable power from the get-go, and that matters, and it matters to the world. But equally in Africa, this is not just a transition issue, this is an economic development issue as well. So being able to drive economic development and create that positive climate flywheel, I think is an incredible opportunity. It's also a big gap. As you know, there's about $2.4 trillion needed a year for EMDs, much of which is in Africa. And much of which must come from the private sector. And here, BII, which is actually the UK's development finance institution, can play a really meaningful role in the context with other development finance institutions. So significantly more than half, it's about 65% of that funding currently comes from DFIs for climate finance in Africa. So that type of capital, which is thoughtful, patient, and more focused on impact than on commercial return, is an absolutely critical piece of what we need to do across the continent. And I think the other point I wanted to call out initially is that there's a type of market failure here. So I think if you look at the GEMS database, if you see longitudinal data for Africa, the perception of risk is massively higher than the real risk. Actually, this is an entirely viable, profitable business across Africa. driving renewable energy. It just isn't perceived in that way. So I think we as DFIs, I think the UK as a government have a real role to play in highlighting that market failure, but taking out some of that risk and really driving early stage projects. So what are we doing as BII? We're trying to do 4 things, I think, here. The first is to support innovation. The second is to lead the way in direct financing of climate projects in Africa. And the third is collaborating with other players and really starting to drive mobilization in the continent. And let me talk a little bit more about those different pieces. Around innovation, I think there are 2 things that we need to do. One is to drive technology innovation. In some cases, that is ab initio technology. In some cases, it's bringing innovation that has worked elsewhere into a particularly more useful framework for Africa. So when we funded Sun Culture for solar irrigation pumps for farmers, that was essentially a bridging of another technology. There's financing innovation we can support. So Basigo is an electric bus company in Kenya, and we've been able to help them through a $7 million financing to do 2 things. One, to start assembling electric buses in Kenya, so driving domestic economic development and opportunity, but also to think about what it is that's stopping people with adoption of electric vehicles. And the answer is, unsurprisingly, it's upfront capital cost. So for the first time in the continent, I think possibly globally, there's a pay-as-you-go model for electric bus financing. So a company doesn't have to incur huge startup costs in terms of financing these, but can actually do it on an ongoing basis. Around broader direct financing, we have about $700 million plus of investment in climate finance projects in the continent, and we have about another $100 million in forestry and nature-based solutions on top of that. So we are a very significant player in the climate finance space in the continent. That ranges from big projects. So Kenhardt in South Africa is the continent's largest solar power and battery storage project, all the way through to much smaller riskier initiatives. So Virunga Power Hydro in Eastern DRC, Moi Power, which is a small microgrid project for 3 towns in northern DRC that previously had no energy. Another great example would be Sierra Leone. We've just funded a solar power project in Sierra Leone. That's a country where less than 23% of the population has access to electricity of any kind. This will actually increase electricity supply in the country by 30%. So nearly a third of incremental capacity. That's BII, Proparco, FMO. It's a group of DFIs who are driving solar investment. But that will be, over time, a viable investment for commercial players to come into. And I think that's the third point is we have to do a better job, and I hope we're starting to do a better job of collaboration and mobilization. And I think the UK Prime Minister announced at UNGA a BII climate mobilization facility to try and do really what I was talking about at the beginning, to bridge the gap between perception and reality and de-risking some of the earlier stage investments so that we can really drive commercial capital as well as DFI and concessional capital in the continent. So those are the sort of areas we're focusing in terms of what the UK can do. Well, actually, I'd echo Helena. I think there's a lot that's happening already. I think the question is, how does the UK galvanize other players to really think about what it takes to make the continent and specific countries within it a more attractive place for investors and a more visibly attractive place for investors? Some of that is definitely thinking about the regulatory frameworks, and I think there's a sort of government-to-government dialogue around how governments can make it easier for institutional investors, but also private developers to come in and build. And I think there are 2 things that would be helpful here. The first is, we're seeing a negative trend at the moment. So bigger developers like Scartech and others are actually withdrawing from the continent rather than investing. And I think creating more consistency of regulatory environment across countries is something that is viable and sensible and will encourage more development. So I think there's a sort of G2G focus around the regulatory environment. I also think there's some great projects like Agia coming out of AFDB, but we really need to galvanize local African developers. So what you want to see in the continent is not just international developers, but really strong local developers. And so projects like that to invest in the sort of the climate development pipeline, young startups in the continent, do they have the early concessional capital that they need? Do they have the frameworks that they need? So I think those are probably the two most significant areas right now.
Thanks very much, Diana. And I think the point around how we de-risk and change the perception of risk is such a key one in terms of mobilising the investment that we're going to need. Next, I'm going to turn to what I'm pleased to say, actually, we have so many women on this panel that we have a singular man. It's so nice at an event. But we do need to hear from the men. So our next panel member is Mithika Mwenda, who is from the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. Mithika, over to you.
Thank you very much. This is one of the most balanced panel to ever participate in, where the other gender is overwhelming the dominant gender. And this is what we have been fighting for as a feminist. So, having listened to my colleague, and especially the minister from Uganda, I'm just asking myself, what really do we need to do to balance between the transitioning to low carbon climate resilient future and our development? We face dual challenge of climate crisis and energy crisis. In Africa, 630 million people lack energy. And there are divided opinions on what now the buzzword here in the just transition. And so what does that mean? Can really just transition be relevant in Africa? Can it drive development in Africa? So one point, just not to repeat what has been said by my colleague, is that investing in renewables, for instance, is not only about emissions. No, it is about building that infrastructure that will drive sustainable development and individual countries' sustainable development blueprints and development in general. And this renewable energy then can fuel growth, it can create jobs, and unlock Africa's potential to leapfrog into a sustainable future. So that's the point. But why then have we not benefited from that boom? We already have that boom because now we have been having discussions at African level. And I was in Uganda for a meeting. I challenged the participants and asked them, right now, Uganda has to make a choice between that transition and really trying to see, are we going to grow on the dirty pathways, or are we going to revert to the vast energy sources which are in abundance? In the Albertine region of Uganda, for instance, the president is very ambitious on a project which is building a pipeline of 1,443 kilometers from Albertine region to Tanga in Tanzania. And I was just challenging them. I think we need a conversation here. The conversation here which we need is not about really what energy we use. It's really just, the potentially stranded asset conversation in Africa. Because it is misunderstood that do we want to leave our coal on the ground and oil on the whole, so that we develop? What choices do we have? And so the point here is that I think the transition to low carbon climate resilient future is inevitable. So we have, whether we want it or not, the world has left, the train has left the station. So what we need to do in Africa, and that's the conversation we are having with our policymakers, is what we need to do in this context, we have advantages and disadvantages, but advantages outweigh disadvantages. We have seen renewable energy, the price of renewable energy and the technology has crashed. It is no longer viable to have coal. Coal now is living in the past, and that is what is going to happen in the fossil fuel in very near future. And this, I remind our people, our leaders that the story of one mineral, which was very very pricey. This was it used to be, everyone used to love it, but now we no longer use it. So one of the things which we need to agree is, and moving forward, then what we need from the UK government, for instance, is we need really commitment beyond pledges. We have and a lot of, and that's what we are discussing here, particularly on climate finance. We need concrete actions that move beyond pledges to provide immediate support. So what support is that? We know the new UK government is very committed on this. This maybe would include accessible financing options, reduced borrowing costs, and the support to build local energy ecosystems. That is, as she has said, we have now the electric cars. Do we have that infrastructure, the charging systems? How does that play in our countries? How does that come? Secondly, reducing financial barriers. And we are happy that UK is part of the discussions on the reform of global financial architecture. What we have, the architecture driven by the World Bank was meant for reconstruction after the Second World War. Is that applicable in the climate-constrained world now? So addressing this, the risk perceptions of African renewable energy projects should be very critical. We need to do that by sharing risk, providing concessional finance, for instance, which I believe that is what UK is doing. International partners then can unlock innovative financing like in private sector, but we believe that the private sector is not the only solution. Then thirdly is collaborative platforms and partnerships. That's very important. We need to strengthen the North-South collaboration. How is that? Is it going to be through bilateral or multilateral processes like the Green Climate Fund? And by the way, we were fighting as the civil society for Green Climate Fund. But I can assure you right now, what is really, really baffling is that to access the Green Climate Fund is even more harder than accessing the World Bank financing, whereas we were running away from the World Bank. So in this context, what do we do in that? So I wanted to finish by looking at what we need to make. We believe that Africa is a solution. Africa is a solution because it has vast renewable energy resources. We have solar, we have wind, we have hydropower and geothermal. That if harnessed effectively, can meet that continent's demands and contribute to this global challenge effort to really address climate change. And secondly, supporting Africa to develop clean energy infrastructure not only addresses energy poverty, but also strengthens the resilience. And this is very important because we need energy for food and medicine preservation. And this is very important. I cannot overstate that majority of our food, I think 50% of our food go into waste because of lack of preservation. Decentralized energy systems are very important, and that is offered through this, the renewables. So thank you very much. I believe that the UK has been a pivotal, a critical actor in this process. And the only thing which we need to see is how do we use the power of countries like UK to prevail upon now that we are shifting through towards the right-wing movement, not only in the UK, but in Europe. Look at what has happened in the US. US is an important actor. It has not delivered, since the Obama time, they have not delivered the 2 billion out of the 3 billion they implant into green climate fund. And this is going to be very difficult because the new re-elected president has said that he is going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. The implication of that is enormous because he is likely to have a coalition of countries which gravitate against him. This is not going to be easy for us, but we believe we still have friends. We have friends like UK, we have EU, and if the US decides that it wants to walk away from the global community, so be it. We are going to have other friends like UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're definitely very lots of friends on this panel, for sure. And I think your emphasis really on the just element of the transition is really welcome in terms of how we need to think about these issues moving forwards. Last but by no means least on the panel, we have Zoisa Northbon, who is the CEO of Octopus Energy. Octopus are one of our fantastic sponsors for the UK Pavilion and engagement here at COP. And I should say, one of the more innovative energy companies in the UK, and I may in fact be a customer of the great work that they've done to innovate domestically in the UK on energy. Zoisa, we're talking a bit today about both what you're doing in your work to engage with Africa and also how the UK can work more with African partners. So really keen to hear from you. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much and good morning. I'm so sorry to have missed some of the comments earlier and I will have to catch up on those. I suppose Octopus, while being known in the UK, we are in 27 countries around the world. I like to think we're a UK Great British export story in many ways. We've grown extremely quickly, so we've done that in just 8 years. And actually the secret behind our success is some of what we're applying to our strategy in Africa, which is we haven't really waited for regulation or investment to send the signal. We've wanted to create the model ourselves and then create the tailwinds that come on the back of that. And I think if we look at what's been created in the last 5 to 6 years of the real movers that have created with pace around the world, that's exactly what they've done. So people like, say, Tesla and Uber, that mindset, but applying it into energy systems. And this has been super important. We always put the customer at the heart of what we do. The way that we build generation, we put it in places where people are going to use it, so close by to them. So we're building shorter, cheaper grid systems. We're using technology to optimize them so they get the lowest cost electrons that they possibly can. Because we were a young company, we were very, very focused on, I suppose, liberalized markets and things where we could really show that we could grow very quickly. But we've been very passionate about doing something specifically within sub-Saharan Africa for a while. And when we came to explore this earlier on this year, what we were finding with a lot of our institutional investors, for instance, was, of course, this idea of risk and the idea of risk slowing you down and very often when you peel back what sits behind that, it's because so much data is missing because we're trying to develop new models in parts of the world where they don't yet exist. And we were even surprised that simple wind data is based on an assumption. It's not even based on accurate information. So we sort of sat and we thought, well, how do we kind of get around this problem? And we knew we were going to have to create the model if people were going to come in behind us. So we sat and I remember talking to lots of consultants and looking at the price of their reports that they were going to produce, probably to tell me it was too risky and we shouldn't build renewables in Africa. And then I looked at the cost of developing a decentralized wind energy system that had solar panels and also had a battery. And actually, they were the same. So I thought, well, actually, our feasibility exercise can actually just be going straight in with a model that fits the African climate and actually collecting real-time data, trying to mobilize a market around it. And then when actually you go to speak to financial organizations, we have a model that works. And it's not based on assumptions. It's based on facts. So we are now building Sierra Leone's first wind farm. and this will be on Sherbro Island. This year we've done a lot of work. So we've submitted plans to the government. We've been doing lots of community engagement with the island in terms of how a wind farm like this could really create the most for a community that is being electrified for the first time. And actually, what's very important here is being able to create, recreate an industry for the first time, which is fishing, and being able to actually refrigerate fish so that it can be exported, which they haven't been able to do for many, many years because of this cooling requirement. So our wind farm in the first instance is going to create around 2,000 freezers so that that can happen. In terms of what the British government can do, I suppose it's looking really at being, I suppose, braver at looking at models like this. And I think a lot of the time when we are speaking to institutions, for instance, they always tell us the models aren't bankable, but they don't really feel collaborative in getting around the table and helping us make them bankable. And that would be almost the pressure I would love to see from the UK government. I think there are also, across the African market, including Sierra Leone, some amazing champions that are really driving the narrative forwards. And for instance, our wind farm in Sierra Leone, the champion on it is Idris Elba, who is, his father is from Sierra Leone, deeply passionate about doing this. And the pace that he has managed to inject in getting the government to collaborate with us, the local community, has been extraordinary. And this, by no means, he's not the only one. There are many, many people across Africa that would do it. I think, sorry, I think my microphone's died. Can you still hear me? We also can't ignore the youth movement in Africa. And I mean, for instance, in Sierra Leone, I think 40% of the population is under 14. And that movement, in speaking to them and engaging with them, this green revolution and the skill sets that we can transfer and the knowledge that we can transfer as a country that is leading in renewables, things like offshore wind, is absolutely extraordinary. So I think also we need to really focus on the youth population. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm very enthused from that set of really positive interventions, actually, about not only what we're doing in partnership between the UK and Africa, but also where we could go. We do have time for a short bit of time for some questions. So I'm going to see if there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question. At the back here.
This was a excellent panel, and Madam, the question is for you. I would say rather it's a request. So, as the panelist alluded, thank you for the excellent work that your colleagues are doing. I'm from Ethiopia, Satish Kumar from Ethiopia. I'm with the delegation. So your colleagues in Addis Ababa has been doing tremendous work. But I was wondering what would be the UK government's position. Of course, for energy and climate change, there are climate actions that are sufficient, not sufficient, but some amount of money that you have put in. But what about nature? Because for biodiversity and forest in Africa, because we have 3,000 national parks, and we need to. It's heritage of humankind. That's one. Number two, I think you have put the statistics very clearly, and the money has not been flowing for implementation of NDC 2, and now we are talking about NDC 3, which we say should be ambitious. And then, in that gap, to strategize to make the NDC 3 more actionable and that could be implemented on the ground, what would be UK government's role? And in that respect, the third one would be we would like to see more support for civil society through your bilateral cooperation funding. And also, I would urge you to strengthen the regional program, regional office that's based in Addis Ababa, because we have Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance and other continental NGOs. We could play a major role in making the NDC 3 more practical on the ground. So, and thank you also for the GGI for the excellent work that you are doing with the government of Ethiopia. We are very appreciative of that. Thank you, Madam.
Great, thank you. Maybe just a couple of responses to that, and then I'm sure there are other colleagues who want to ask questions. I mean, you ask about nature, and that is a really important priority. And the Foreign Secretary, who is here this week, has been very clear in coming into office that he wants to put more of an emphasis on nature and the work that we're doing on nature as part of our approach to climate and climate finance. And actually later today, we're going to be talking in some events about forestry in particular as one example of that. So I think we would very much recognise a growing focus on that aspect. And you also raised the question and sort of mentioned it at the beginning, and various other panel members have talked about sort of pace and speed of delivery of finance against the growing goals. And very much our diagnosis is that we need to fix those bits of the system that are not delivering at pace. Later on today, the Foreign Secretary will be at an event talking with Mia Motley about the Bridgetown reform agenda and the work that we're doing to mobilise and speed up the pace, not just in the existing green climate instruments, but more generally across the system, because we need to mobilise all of that finance at pace. So I think we would recognise that challenge and that we need to work more on getting the finance where it needs to go. I guess I would just sort of emphasise on this panel, we've heard from Diana Zoysa as well, it's about partnering with the private sector to do a lot of that as well, and that's a really important part of our work. So thank you for your question. I think there was there a question? Did you want to ask a question? Yep, here.
Alors, bonjour à tous, je vais parler en français, je ne sais pas si on m'entend. Alors, je suis de la Côte d'Ivoire, donc je suis le coordonnateur du PACJA en Côte d'Ivoire. Et vraiment, je remercie déjà tous les panélistes, surtout les directeurs exécutifs de PACJA pour son intervention et des solutions vraiment proposées en matière de transition énergétique. Voilà, mais moi, je voudrais aborder la question sur les solutions basées sur la nature, en fait. Voilà, aujourd'hui, il y a vraiment beaucoup d'efforts qui sont fournis par les communautés pour pouvoir préserver les forêts et la biodiversité. Mais de ce que les communautés ont besoin, c'est vraiment un encouragement. Et nous, on voudrait que les paiements pour les services écosystémiques soient mieux valorisés. Et c'est une forme d'argent ou encore d'intéressement qui arrive directement aux communautés qui sont engagées dans ce travail qui est fait. Dans tous les villages aujourd'hui, même en Côte d'Ivoire, par exemple, la Côte d'Ivoire a près de 90% de sa couverture forestière en autour de 50 ans. Voilà. Mais aujourd'hui, il y a des efforts qui sont faits par les communautés pour pouvoir restaurer ces couvertures forestières-là. Mais il faut encourager ces communautés-là. Et cet encouragement, nous pensons bien que le paiement pour les services écosystémiques qui va arriver directement aux communautés serait vraiment une réponse. C'est vraiment une proposition que je voulais faire. Merci.
Bah alors, merci. Je vais reprendre en anglais, si ça va. So I think it's a great question about nature solutions, and I think we just touched on that in Jenny's response. But I think there is a need for two things. One, to have a much more robust framework for valuing nature-based solutions. And actually at Climate Week in New York, we were talking with a bunch of people, including Conservation Internationals. How do we translate the value of biodiversity and the natural ecosystem into something that financial markets and governments can recognize and can also see as comparable across places? Because one of the challenges in seeking funding is, how do you know if you're having an impact? And we've done a lot of work in measuring sort of, renewable energy and effectiveness there. We've done far less around biodiversity. And I think there is a need for a group of people. I think the Natural History Museum's got some really interesting work on this, Conservation International and others, to come together to start thinking about what those international metrics should be. So I agree with you, but I think we need to get a lot more concrete around that so other people can see the type of impact and importance you're talking about. I think the second is actually understanding we need to drive these metrics through other projects as well. And so two areas I think we're interested in. One is forestry. You talked about the forests in Ethiopia, but actually commercial forestry is going to be really important in Africa. So you can't rely just on national parks and on governments supporting this. this has to be something that we can drive sustainable industry around that creates, real employment, jobs for communities, and spin-off industries for communities. And we know you can do that with appropriately driven commercial forestry. But if your foundational platform for those is they must include biodiversity, conservation solutions, you actually end up with a really strong, thriving ecosystem around that. So I would encourage us to do that. And finally, even around some energy projects themselves, I'm going to give you a non-African example, but we funded a big wind power project in Pakistan. And as part of the plan for the wind power, we insisted on their replanting the mangrove swamps and encouraging biodiversity in that area. And this has led to a whole new set of industries and a community that, instead of worrying about the wind farm, is really excited about it because they can now collect shrimp, which weren't there before, freshwater shrimp from the mangrove. So I think for all of these, it's how do you take the combination of getting the metrics right, really driving some specific investments that drive biodiversity, but also bringing biodiversity into the systems that we build around existing projects.
Thanks very much. I think we've got time probably for one more question, so we'll take this one here. Thank you.
So thank you so much. My name is Charles Mwangi. I come from Kenya, but I work for Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. So one question, and probably two in that regard. Now, there is a very big connection between energy and health issues, particularly because in Africa, one of the causes of deaths is actually indoor operation coming from biomass fuel that is used by our mothers, in the kitchens. And of course, now our Minister for Energy from our neighboring country, Uganda, indicated that in actual sense, we can make electricity, easily accessible for cooking. And I think I want to ask two things. Probably, what is the UK government doing in terms of establishing nexus between health and climate change, especially now focusing on energy and indoor pollution? But number two, there are two elements in terms of energy, issues. One is access, but there's also a question of affordability. So how, and this comes on with, is connected again with the question of de-risking investments in energy, for example. How do we ensure that we have a proper tax regimes, to encourage investments in the energy sector and to make sure that energy is not just accessible, but also affordable, including for cooking? Thank you.
Did you want to comment on this?
Well, the biggest contribution into the cost of energy comes from the cost of investment in its generation by 60%. So the more we get concessional loans for energy generation, the more we see the end user tariff becoming affordable. So it's all about getting some of the money from climate change to be invested in energy generation. A country like Uganda, which has only renewable energy, really, should not be talking about, transiting from what? We have this clean energy already. We even have energy generated but not yet utilized. And now people are coming in to create data centers. But yet we have other places in Uganda still in darkness. So the monies, the finances that we use to invest in energy generation, transmission and distribution form the greatest part of the cost of the end user tariff. So how do you get access to that money with grace periods, affordable, so that countries can be able to pay back without putting too much pressure, is the thing that we have to be assisted on. Yes.
Thank you. And then just on your question about the health-climate interaction, I would just say that this is a hugely important and growing part of how we're thinking about these issues in the UK. I mean, I think we're at the point now where we look across the waterfront of what we're doing in our cooperation and need to embed both the impacts of climate change on how we think about these issues, but also how we make everything resilient to the future challenges, including ensuring that health systems are resilient and that we are building in everything from issues around heat and around access to the right kind of medicines, etc. So it's a really growing part of our work, that intersection between the sort of health agenda and the climate agenda, and really important point. So thank you for making it. I'm conscious that we've sort of come to the end of our time today, so I just wanted to finish by thanking very much our panel for coming and joining this event. I hope it's been a useful one for those of you that have come. I think it really has reinforced for me the importance of UK-Africa partnership on these issues, both in terms of what we're doing at the government level, the private sector, and the cooperation that we're doing together. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for those of you who joined.